I don't know if I can eat.
So I think I'm ready for part two. I hope you are. And I'll tell you how we got on with our auction buying journey. There's a few cautionary tales here as well. So if you're new here, hi, I'm Vicky, the Carpenter's daughter. Normally I do DIY renovations in a house, but the last 14 months I've been on a boat. Now, if you haven't watched part one of this video, I highly recommend it because I talked to you about how we lost around £4,000 trying to buy two different houses at two different stages, and they both fell through for different reasons. It was very, very frustrating. And where I left things was we'd found a property in an auction, placed an early bid, and we had literally no idea whether we were going to get it or not and how much competition was involved. And I'd always been frightened about the idea of buying something in an auction and just generally didn't entertain them. I'd move on because I just assumed that it was a worst case scenario. They'd have structural issues, subsidence, all kinds of things that I probably wouldn't be capable of, or they'd previously flooded and there were no way of getting any finance on it. It would be cash only. And there's also a risk that if you do get surveys on it and you're still not the highest bidder anyway. And the moment the gavel strikes and you are the highest bidder, you've immediately got to pay auction fees, seller's solicitors fees, a deposit for the house, and this massively racks up and it's all non-refundable. Then you've got a very tight deadline to complete. It's usually 28 days to, I've seen up to 6 weeks. And if you don't, you could incur more costs or forced to pull out and lose it entirely. So you're basically at the mercy of the solicitors doing everything on time for you. And many people tell me that online businesses like I Am Sold and Pattinson's have higher fees, much higher fees, but they make it more accessible because you can go online, sign up, get yourself verified and instantly download the legal pack. You can go through it yourself, and usually there's things like fixtures and fittings forms, property information, searches, title plans and deeds, and just look for any issues that are there. And if the seller's passed away, it's much more limited information. And then it's recommended to hire a solicitor to go through anything just in case you've missed anything. But I'd also look at it yourself as well. And with auction properties, I always assumed that we never stood a chance and that everybody in the granny would be wanting to place a bid. And we didn't think about buying any properties in auction until we were in the middle of buying house number 1, where our solicitor turned around and said, Vicky, you're paying nearly full asking price. They've turned around and said it's sold as seen. They're not signing any of the paperwork because the solicitors were acting as the executors, and we just literally don't know what you're buying. What you're getting is the risks of an auction property at full asking price. And the septic tank had failed anyway, so the mortgage lender refused to lend. To find another mortgage lender that would lend would definitely have a higher rate in the end, paying a lot more in the long run. Or we could sell our boat, the roof over our head to pay the difference, and then we wouldn't have any money left over to do any of the repairs that the surveyor picked up. The way things had gone, I just wasn't interested anymore, but it got me seriously thinking about auction properties. Now, if you remember house number 2 that I mentioned last week with the hidden agricultural clause, well, here's a cautionary tale. We went to view it on the last day of its auction from a second cycle. Well, I feel like I've got a very good radar when someone tries to pressure sell to me. And the estate agent at the time said, well, if you put a bid on now, you can make sure it's yours, there'll be no gazumping. But I thought, well, nobody's been interested so far. It's going back to a normal sale tomorrow. I don't want to pay ridiculous fees. So the next morning, I thought I'd offer a lower price, which got accepted within half an hour. Now, if I'd placed a bid before, I would have had to pay a lot of fees, then find out an agricultural clause was there, and then either pull out or become a farmer and have that as my main source of income, which I've heard is very difficult with less than an acre. Then it devalues the property anyway because I can't sell it on to anybody other than a farmer. But obviously, if you're at risk of losing potentially about £30,000 in fees and walking away, I've often wondered whether, if I face that situation, whether I've just secretly gone ahead with it anyway. But I don't think I could have lived with myself because I put stuff on YouTube and it may only be a matter of time until somebody finds out. Luckily, it was only £2,000 that we lost, but it was a valuable lesson to do even more due diligence for the next one. So this was around May, June time, and the sun was shining. It was the peak season to be selling properties. And it was around this time when we seriously started to look at auction properties. And the first one that we looked at, we thought, wow, what a bargain, £250,000. We knew it wasn't a standard construction. But when we turned up, everybody and the granny was there. Loads of posh cars and builders' vans in the drive. We suspected we didn't really stand a chance. So instead of hiring the solicitor to review the legal pack for this one, we thought we'd just sit back and just as an experience see what would happen. And I was completely shocked that £250,000 turned into 452. There were no chance we would have ever had that, and it probably sold to a property developer or a millionaire wanting to knock down and put the dream home in there. Then for house number 2, very similar scenario. Start the price low, loads of people turned up, 6 acres, similar to the other one. That started at 250, sold for 360. Again, we wouldn't have had anything left over to do anything. In fact, we couldn't afford it full stop. So the difference between the first 2 houses at auction that we found was this one started at a much higher price. It was way over budget, but we loved the location and it looked like a diamond in the rough, so I saved it just in case. And it was a late 1980s bungalow with rural views, perfect for what we were looking for, and coincidentally, it was only 15 minutes away from my mother-in-law. And by this point, we were visiting her once a week because unfortunately back in May, her husband, my father-in-law, passed away. And we were visiting her regularly just to make sure she was okay and keep her company. And what some of you may not know, he was a massive influence to the start of my DIY journey. It was always at the other end of the phone. I could call him up and say, Alf, how'd you do this? How'd you do that? He'd always draw plans as well and guide me through. He was very patient, and he's sorely missed. So do you remember when I said always save a property on Rightmove just in case, even though it's out of your price range, something might happen, it might get cheaper? Well, it did. By the time it got to July, it was reduced by £40,000 after the first auction cycle. That's when I thought, we're in the area, we may as well ring up to try and book something. So I rang the estate agents and asked, why is it in auction? That's the first thing I always think, what's wrong with it? And she said, well, it's not been lived in for over a year. It was originally on our books to go as a normal sale. And by December, the pipes in the attic froze, bust, flooded the whole house, and there were no ceilings left. So I instantly thought, this sounds like me. I might be in for a chance on this one. So I definitely rang and booked an appointment. And the next day when we went to view it, only 1 and a bit ceilings were down. It wasn't that bad. And the pictures didn't reflect how amazing the place was. But I remember at the time my husband said, why are we going to view this property? It's still out of our price range. But I just think you never know. If it's already had 1 reduction and nobody was interested, maybe the price is still too high and there might be another price reduction later. You never know. Now, I don't know if I said before, but this was an online auction where the fees are quite a lot. And when you do save the property on their system, I got constant calls every day from these people asking, so what did you think? Are you going to put an offer in today? They put pressure on you and it can feel a bit much. And we did say we were interested, but the fees were ridiculous. We didn't like the fees. And maybe then after the 4th phone call, the auctioneer said, well, we had a bid before on the first cycle, and I asked how much it was, and he said it was significantly less than the guide price. And I thought, what? How is that possible? I thought this was like eBay. You have to put the price in and you can't put any lower. Apparently it was a public auction and you could put whatever price you wanted in. I didn't even think that was possible. So it got me thinking, this could have been a lie. Obviously you can't trust auctioneers whatsoever and estate agents. And also he said, if we don't put an early bid in now to show that we're interested, they have been known to pull the auction early to somebody privately. And I felt it was very likely that if we put an early bid on anyway, they'd use us as bait with other people to say, hey, we've got somebody interested, there's competition, you'll have to put a bid on, and just make it look more desirable. But before I even entertained putting a bid on, I needed to do one thing, and that was absolutely make sure that the place had no agricultural clauses like the other ones, because it was a semi-rural property. I first found the original planning application for the 1980s replacement bungalow, but the replacement being a key word, I went straight to the council and asked them to dig even further and look at the microfiche files, just in case the original property had an agricultural clause, because I wasn't getting bitten again. And luckily, it was fine. And only from that point on, I asked my solicitor to review the legal pack, and she pulled up a couple of things like there was a risk of flooding from a nearby drain and a lake, and advised us to check it was insurable. Luckily, that was fine too. And because it had a septic tank, it was likely that it needed to be updated. Also, the reason I thought we did stand a chance with this one is when we turned up for the viewing, there were only us there. So it wasn't until 8 days before the listing ended that we decided to put our early bid on. We knew everything seemed to be okay, but we didn't go with the guide price, we just went a little bit more than the previous bid that they said they'd had. Now you might be wondering whether we had a survey on this, because I would recommend it with a property usually. With this one, I didn't want to pay another £800 to be told lots of seek a damp specialist, seek a tree surgeon, pay for a drain survey, pay for a septic tank survey. It all adds up. So after us viewing it with our eagle eyes, I got my parents to come along as well, and I treat them like my structural surveyors because they've had years of experience renovating and building properties from scratch. They know their stuff, thankfully. So once my parents went to view it and thought, yes, this is amazing, we'd even sell up our place to move here, that's when I felt comfortable we could bid on it. So days went on after our early bid. We had no inkling that they were going to end it early just for us in case nobody else was interested, until about 2 days before I got a call from the auctioneer saying if you increase your bid by £10,000 and you're the only people bidding, they'll sell it to you. So there's obviously a lot of negotiation going on between the auctioneer and the seller's solicitors. And we thought, okay, that was what we thought we'd put it up to just in case we were bidding against somebody else. But I didn't want to do that until very last minute. Well, not quite last minute. If you look at some of the contracts, if you do place a bid within the last 10 minutes of the auction closing, then they're likely to add another 5 or 10 minutes after, and it could keep going on and on. More time will be added per bid. So on the last day, we decided to drive to my parents' house for moral support and place the bid there. They'd only gone and changed the contract with an hour to spare, and I was frantic because it was about 100 pages long. We'd already placed a bid agreeing on those terms in the contract and paid a solicitor to review them, so I had to try and contact her to have a look at it again. And my husband was sat there trying to compare the original one to the new one page by page. Luckily he spotted something about drainage, which wasn't really an issue for us. It wasn't a deal breaker anyway, but it could have gone so much worse. So on the 11th minute, not within the 10 minutes, I didn't want to add extra time, that's when I placed a bid. It was the scariest, well, one of the scariest moments I've ever faced. But thankfully, they were true to the word and they were selling it to us. But the moment that gavel struck, remember, we had to pay a big chunk of our savings. That made us feel really vulnerable because there was no guarantee it was still going to be ours. We had to then complete it within 28 days. 28 days. We did ask if it was possible with our solicitor. She said, yes, it's doable. Please be doable. So with a very tight window, I had to crack on with a load of DIY jobs on the boat, working through a massive snagging list. And that's why I could only afford to do short YouTube shorts and social media things. I just didn't have the time. And if you didn't unsubscribe because of them, thanks for sticking with me. And when we got to the final week of our 28 days, we were asked to transfer our money to the solicitors. More panic set in because we couldn't transfer it all in one lump online. So we thought, let's go into a bank and do it properly. And since lockdown, most of them only open part-time, which is crazy because Doncaster is a big place. It's a city now. So we had to drive to our nearest one that was open, which was Scunthorpe, and then paid £30 for a BACS transfer to get it all done and dusted. That was a weight off my mind. Now, with it being an auction, I felt like maybe I had a bit too much faith. I wasn't super stressed anyway until the penultimate day. Our solicitors emailed us to tell us that their solicitors hadn't sent over a certificate of compliance. Now I still don't even know what that is, if anyone knows, but apparently you need it to exchange on a property, and all along they'd said they'd provide it on the day, but our solicitor wanted to see it just as a draft to put their mind at rest, and they contacted them and they just ignored them. So I called my mum the night before, freaking out, because if they didn't complete on the day, we would have to pay so much interest each day, and I really didn't want to pay a penny more. In theory, it could have gone on for months and months, and apparently their solicitors weren't obliged to provide it anyway. And the very next morning, we got an email to say, it was ours! Pick up the keys! And thanks for everyone for rooting for us. So as soon as we could, we filled the first van load of our stuff, the first of many, left the narrowboat temporarily on the canal and headed straight there to get the keys. And obviously with loads of keys it was hard to find out which key fit which door. So over the next few weeks I can't wait to show you the whole place, the plans we've got, the land, and all of the repairs that we've urgently had to crack on with There's videos coming on that. And if you've got any questions, advice or comments, feel free to let me know in the comments below. And if you want to find out more about the place right now, you can head over to my Patreon and support the channel and my new DIY adventure. And hopefully I'll catch you in my next one. Ooh.